Hello, everyone. While I'm busting out the unpopular opinions, I'm going to go ahead and just go all in. Let me go ahead and just talk about Meta. Why the hell not? At this point, I've already gone pretty far off the deep end, so what's even more deep? Okay, so I do have a lot to say about this, but in order for me to properly relay what I want to say, let me go ahead and unpack a bunch of information for you. Starting with the international system. Okay, so I don't know if it's still a thing, and somebody can correct me if it's not. But when I last looked, the way the international reporting system for law enforcement worked is that you would have to report to your local agency or department, and then from there, they are expected to forward that report to Interpol, and then Interpol forwards that to the country affected. So, for example, let's say a U.S. citizen witnessed a crime in the United Kingdom. They would have to report to their local law enforcement agency and then request that that report gets forwarded to Interpol so that Interpol can forward to the United Kingdom. You can see where this is a problem because in, well, the United States, the chances of getting an officer to forward that kind of report is going to be very slim. It also adds unnecessary amounts of additional communication to the process to ensure that the crime is properly reported. So that's just the international side. Let's talk about the U.S. military side now, because this is where things get even murkier. So, in some U.S. bases, and I don't know if this applies to other bases too, but in the U.S. in particular, there are certain military bases where they do not have jurisdiction over the internet, meaning that, let's just say it's in reverse. Somebody from another country recognizes a U.S. service member doing something bad on base, and they report, well, it's not going to go anywhere because the military police don't have any jurisdiction, so they're not going to take action. Now, it might be possible that other entities or branches might take action, whether that be JAG or one of the other ones, because maybe it's misconduct or something like that. But the military police likely won't get involved because they don't have jurisdiction over it. So there's your other issue. Let's talk about issue 3, and that is actually dealing with bots, problematic people on the internet, and the other things. The issue with dealing with those people is that you're entirely reliant on the people behind the app to deal with the problem. So, in the case of Twitter, you gotta hope that their moderation system actually does something. For example. Now, that results in issues because obviously they're not going to take action when they should. You see, a lot of the times, an issue can be resolved by nipping it in the bud sooner before it becomes a problem. So even if it's borderline TOS, right, it's better to deal with the borderline TOS and just give them a suspension rather than let it go from borderline TOS to an actual TOS violation, is what I'm saying. And then to further this, there's another thing you have to realize. In addition to relying on the moderation of the platform, you also have to realize that the platforms that don't enforce the real ID policy, and we'll get into that in a minute, they only can work on an email address or an IP address to find that said problematic person in real life. IP addresses can at times contain the information to whoever owns that internet service provider. So let's just say that the problematic person is with Spectrum Internet, for example. Well, it will show that this user with this IP address is from Spectrum Internet and that this is who owns this particular Spectrum account. So that is certainly in place, but the issue is that IP addresses can be spoofed, and not all the time will a internet service provider like Spectrum or the others will get involved in helping with these issues unless it's something very, very severe. So there's your 3 problems right there. So let me get into real ID policies now that we've kind of covered some of the issues. because this kind of ties into my thoughts about Facebook in general. It's a new name, but it's the same problem. But Real ID policy is actually something Facebook practices. So here's the issue with Real ID policies and what it's about. Real ID policy means that if Facebook thinks that you're fake, they have it in their policy that you must show a student ID or government ID, whether that be passport, driver's license, or things like that. You can see where this is a problem already. You should not be forced to give that information to a service provider, in my opinion. But regardless, you do have to show that to prove that you're real. Now, Real ID policies can work, but they need to be handled by a platform, entity, or otherwise that's not corrupt and will do the right thing with that information, which is, of course, not going to be Facebook. Let's be real about that one. But a Real ID policy would certainly resolve some of the prior issues that I mentioned, because if you have a real name to work with, then you can actually track down the person a lot easier. Tying a Real ID to a person's account and verifying it would ensure that if they ever do cause a problem, you don't need to worry about going through the internet service provider to get assistance to find them. You can skip that step and immediately go to whatever law enforcement you have. But yeah, so Real ID policy can work, and it can resolve some of the issues, but again, Facebook doesn't really do a great job with a lot of things. So, yeah, Facebook is really not a great platform to be performing Real ID policy, more or less. And that's not the only issue that Facebook has. Facebook has a plethora of issues besides not handling their policies really well. You can watch YouTube videos on this, but Facebook live streams are allowed to show hacks and cheats. This was seen most common with Call of Duty Warzone. Some of your hackers and cheaters actually did stream on Facebook Live, made money off of it, and still got views in the process. Yeah, that's a real problem too, because they're encouraging the behavior of basically ruining the game for everybody else. So not only do you have a Real ID policy problem, but now you also have the fact that they're not really doing what they should with that. Then, of course, there's all the other scandals, and I don't need to go through them all, but I think I just want to highlight these two main issues because the other ones you can find on your own. So, my thoughts on Meta, which is now Facebook. By the way, I've had a really great meme this whole time. I'm not sure if anybody's noticed, but anyways, so Meta. What I understand of Meta is that they're trying to be more, virtual world-ish, I guess you can say, because what they're doing is they're keeping Facebook, as far as I can tell. The Meta change is only applied to the parent company, but Facebook is still going to be its own thing. But Meta is going to be WhatsApp, Instagram, and kind of that stuff. Or stuff equivalent to it, I should say. That's more or less what they're shooting for here. So they're keeping Facebook. They're just rebranding the parent company, and then they're just shifting some of the apps from one end of their company to the other. Is my understanding of it anyways. If I'm wrong, somebody can correct me in the comments, but do so respectfully. I get really tired of disrespect and hateful comments. I'll have a civil conversation with you if you show respect to me. That's all I ask of you. So, yeah, that's kind of what's going on. And so, going forward, I don't agree with doing it this way. Because, well, one, it's at a wrong time for Facebook/Meta because of just all the scandals that are rocking them. Two is that really, you can rebrand it all you want to, but if you were unable to fix all the prior issues that I mentioned and the ones that you can find on the internet, you shouldn't be making this move, because then that means you're going to be handling Meta just as poorly as you did Facebook. That's my two thoughts pretty much summed up for you. Seeing as I've kind of already mentioned some issues and my thoughts on Meta, I just want to real quickly talk about the future of platforms, because I think this kind of relates to Meta, and to give you, of course, some examples too. So, I think that in order for a platform, whether that be Twitter, Facebook, or the other ones, to truly succeed and to truly be safe for all, it does need a real ID policy, but one that isn't handled by a corporation, company, or other. I think that a more reasonable solution would be one based on currently existing entities like the United Nations. I think the United Nations could more than handle creating their own equivalent of Twitter, and from there creating a charter or something to make sure that said platform has international status, so that now the rules are changing in that it's no longer going to be about the laws of your country. It's going to be based on the fixed laws of the world. What that would do is it would elevate it from a country-to-country basis to a one rule for all thing. And you might think that this is probably going to be crazy or problematic, and it certainly will be if it's handled by bad actors. But if you think about it, escalating it to an international status rather than a country-to-country basis would enable more law enforcement power. So if there is something going on in the world that really, really needs a response right now to save a person's life, then it can be done quickly, efficiently, and legally. That's what you have to think about here, right? It's not just, oh, what can go wrong, it's what can also go right. And so you see, a lot of people are saying, oh, we need better internet safety and all this other stuff. Well, that starts with actually understanding the system as it is now, and then being like, well, this is what we can do to fix it. And while my UN example might not be the best example, it's certainly a start to say, well, this is kind of where you need to start thinking, and this is what we could do. So I do see that happening at some point where international recognition is given to the internet. I know it's a little bit off topic, but I want to end the recording by saying one reason why I think this could happen, because there's an example of something that happened recently where that happened. There was a motorcycle safety standard test for helmets. Well, let me back up, I should say. A safety standard for motorcycle helmets. Yeah, I got my wording a little mixed up there. That was submitted to the UN, and then the UN took a portion of it and basically put it into, I guess, a resolution article or something like that. I'm not sure what the official term is for it. I can link in the description if you really want to see it, but here's where this is really interesting, this motorcycle safety test thing. By making it a UN thing, they're elevating it to international status, which means that now something as crucial as a helmet safety test is now going to be elevated to a point where it's kind of like NATO, where you have an international standard for the safety, right? So the same thing could happen to the platform stuff, but in the future. And I would hope that it's done well, because honestly, I think that's if a couple of people can get together and put together a really great idea and make it work with good actors, I think it has the potential to do a lot. But that's all I have to say. Thanks for listening.